I'm about to introduce one of our own crew, Peter Cottle, who is our Queensland Territory Manager and SME. He's going to talk to us today about student-driven content, I should say. I was about to say school, that's terrible. So he's going to talk to us about encouraging student-driven content and ensuring learners have their hand in their own success and personalising learning to incorporate their interests. In this session, he's going to look at some ways you can engage your students to be co-creators of their learning environment and become lifelong learners. So let's welcome Pete.
Thanks, Belle, and hi everyone again. I want to start today by just sort of gauging from all of you here what your roles are in schools. So just with a show of hands, if you're an educator, put your hands up. So if you're a classroom teacher, yep. IT administrator, IT support, yep. Marketing, comms, any of those people here? No, okay, great. So before I get into it, I just wanted to sort of expand on a little bit more about me. In the introduction, I wasn't allowed to give too much more information. Until 3 months ago, I was still working in a school. I was working at St Margaret's Anglican Girls' School in Brisbane, and had successfully rolled out as the project lead 2 Schoolbox instances between St Margaret's and its sister school, St Aidan's. That project led me to a lot of conversations with Sean and James over the time, at events like this, and discussions around, just what they were looking to do moving forward. And I, at that stage early on, was not really interested in moving out of education into this sector. As I said earlier, I've got 5.5-year-old triplets, and for me it was a piece that, from a family perspective, wasn't going to work for us. But in the last 3 months, somehow my worlds have all just magically aligned, and my kids have started school. That's going well. I've moved into this new role. It's fantastic. Working with the team, albeit in a work from home role, and the rest of the team in Melbourne has its challenges, but is also incredibly rewarding because I get to come down and spend really purposeful quality time with the team and develop and also bring to the table my experience as an educator, not just as a classroom teacher, but as I said earlier, as a head of e-learning and someone who's run senior libraries and junior libraries. But in that role, also having had, and that's the reason why I asked you what your roles were in schools, having had the opportunity and the freedom with a really limited teaching load to get to speak to people in schools that probably a lot of classroom teachers don't really get to interact with. And secondly, understand and learn from. So in my 3 years in the role, having rolled out Schoolbox at St Margaret's, I was fortunate to really be able to work alongside marketing and communications. My wife was and still is a teacher at the school. She's currently head of sport, but when she came back from maternity leave, she was given the role as head of admissions. So I got to work with the admissions team and look at how Schoolbox could address some of the workflow friction points that they had. And then that led me to working with groups like development and community and philanthropy, and so all of those other areas within school and independent schools particularly that are critical to supporting that key big rock of schools, and that is teaching and learning. And that's where my heart lies, in teaching and learning. But until I'd had the opportunity to work with those people and understand what their priorities are in a school and what their roles are, I didn't fully appreciate how all of it works together. And so my presentation today, whilst it's focused on student-driven content, it's not necessarily focused on it from the perspective of just teaching and learning. It's more around an in-principle belief that I've always had, and Adam this morning, who I thought was a fantastic keynote speaker, and he resonated very loudly for me, about refocusing on the key part of schools, and that being students. And it's always been something that I'm really interested in that previous to working in education, I was a civil and structural engineer, and coming into education, I saw very quickly how a lot of the busyness in schools doesn't really relate to students. And a lot of it doesn't unlock what I think is tremendous agency that they have. And to quote someone who is a mentor of mine and I've worked with very closely, over the years, a professor at the Queensland University of Technology. He's the head of the Information Systems faculty up there, Michael Roseman, his name is. Students are the most untapped asset in a school. Schools have tremendous idle assets lying around. You've got buildings, you've got swimming pools, and Michael is an out-of-the-box thinker and came into our school and posed a series of questions to us around what do you do with the things that you have when you're not using them for the sole purpose that you currently use them for? So what else could they be? And one of the things that we all sort of started with was, that, as I said, that built environment, the IP of the school, the capacity of teachers to be able to sort of come to events like this and share the knowledge of schools with other schools. But the one thing that wasn't considered at this round table, and it included all the senior leaders and a select group of educators from the school and people from the business sector from the outside of the school, were the students. And it made me think about, at that time, how Schoolbox was positioned within the school. And it made me think about this question: is any virtual learning environment built for students, or could it be built by students? And if the latter is possible and we give them the ability to do so, what could that look like? And it led to a whole bunch of other questions that gave us answers that were really things that we didn't know. And so I'm hoping that I can share some of those things today. So that's kind of just a bit of a prelude to sort of my thinking around how I come to this notion of student-driven content. Because we've all heard of, inquiry-based learning or student-led learning. For me, it's not just about the learning, but it's about their involvement within the school. What are the things that we don't know that matter to students? So what if they own the learning or they own the content? Does it make you feel like these two teachers? Is your immediate reaction to think, that's a terrible idea? We give them just too much. I'm just going to pose that as a question for you. Oh, we've gone too. So for me, it's a question of, and it may be for you, it's a question of ethics. If we give students too much rope and too much control, do they just go a little bit crazy? We've all been in that environment where you've been in a classroom and it's just not going to happen today. You've prepared wonderful lessons, you've prepared wonderful activities if it's outside the teaching and learning space. You've ticked all the boxes, but for some reason it's just not resonating with them and you're just not connecting. And then the other option is obviously then in reaction to that is to really rein it in and be the person, right, this is how it's going to be. I'm in control, you'll do this. And so there's a challenge there. And the challenge is one that I believe is a question of ethics. From an educator's perspective, there are certain boxes that we must tick. We have curriculum that we must deliver. There are strategic agendas within a school. And a lot of these kinds of things, for me, become like those little images that Adam had this morning in his slide deck, that are little tiny, we have to do these things. But my question is, do we? And if we do, who can do them? Should it always be us? And if it is always us, does that just continue to add to the huge load that, as educators, you already have? I mean, he could have had probably 20 more little images in that slide. So if you give them too much control, if a teacher's in control too much, this is a narrative that plays out a lot. Students are disengaged, they're not interested in the content, they just don't care. So they see you as the person who's dictating the agenda. Conversely, if you have too little control, the risk is that something like this can happen. Now, when I talk to educators a lot, I get the feeling that there is the consensus is that whilst this is an extreme image and it's an extreme example, that's the potentiality of letting go of some of the control. And I don't believe in any of that. Or is this an option? Just not even considering it. I'll just park that issue over there. I'm not going to think about it. I don't want to know about it because I'm just Pac-Manning my day. I'm Pac-Manning my week. I'm Pac-Manning my term and the year just to get through, just to survive every day. because it's hard, right? The work of educators is without doubt got to be the hardest profession there is. It really does. So balance is definitely the key in this space. It's about finding that balance between a little bit of control and allowing to unlock their agency a bit. So if you think about it from the perspective of us as a business, and I came to this really open-minded. We launched our new website at the end of last year. We were really excited about it. Matt Sambler, creative director, has done so much work around a new branding, and this is our new logo. And I just want you to spend a second to see where students are positioned in that logo. I'll make it bigger for you. That's the logo blown up. Where are students? Where are they placed there? And what do you think of when you see where students are? If you can't see them, that's where we place students. Parents, staff, students. When I first saw this image, it made me wonder why we'd come to that point as a business, that we had placed students last in that list of people within schools. I pose this question too. If we are focusing, as Adam kindly reminded us about, more on students and less on the busyness and the little things, should we be placing students in our logo in that space? Now, I've spoken to Matt about this, and he wasn't even cognizant of the fact that that would be something that's an issue. And it may not seem like a big issue, but if you think about it in another way, and we change the logo, which we now have, we now put students at the front of the agenda. So Schoolbox is not for parents, staff and students. It's for students. It's for staff and it's for parents. And so that subtle change for me was really, really important. And in my role, being able to bring to the business some knowledge around how some of these things, whilst subtle, can have a huge impact on the way we think about education, we just changed it immediately. So, and I didn't find out until yesterday that that's now officially, the logo is officially changed, so that's now on the way, it's different. But why does that matter? Why does that matter? You may be sitting there thinking, it doesn't matter, it's just a logo, it's just some text. But to me, it really does matter. And as a parent, and many of you will be parents, when you think about your own children, you would be, if you're anything like me, hoping that the school, and therefore anything that supports the school, whether it be a virtual learning environment, the built environment, anything, puts students front and centre in the agenda. So, albeit that that's only a small thing, and if I don't spend another day at Schoolbox and I've made one change, I'm really happy that that's the case now. So, I guess that's just at a conceptual level and a in principle level. But what contents can students drive in Schoolbox? And some of you, many of your schools, will already be letting students have control over your environment in certain ways. So there are many components that already exist within the system that allow students to drive the content and be in control. You've got blogs, news component, you've got the chat component, social streaming, forums, and students can poll. But one of the things that we don't see a whole lot of is schools letting go of control and giving students areas within their instance to be able to use some of these tools, because the value in doing so allows you as a school to see the things that you didn't realise you didn't know. And I'll give you one example. So until in 2017, there was a timetabling issue in my school, and somehow I magically ended up with no classes, and it was fantastic. And of course, I only had one class to teach anyway in order to be able to facilitate my role well. But once the end of the week came and everyone realised that that wasn't going to fly, we created what we called an English conversations class, because I'm a secondary English teacher despite being early childhood trained. And that English conversations class involved students who were our international students who were taking English, mainstream English, and also doing ESL, but we weren't still seeing the development we needed. So we set up this class, and there was no agenda with this class. It was literally just 2 hours a week, getting together, talking about them, learning more about them, developing their spoken language skills, their English speaking skills. And this group of 23 students, in the end, taught me so much more about what I didn't know about the school and their experience of it than I would have ever done if I'd have never met them and spent the next 25 years in the school just teaching. And that information was this. So international students, when they came to the school, like any students, and we're at St Margaret's, where I came from, was an Anglican day and boarding school for girls in Brisbane. So students come in and very quickly they're pigeonholed as day girl, boarder, international. And so you're put in this little bucket, and that means something. So we know what a day girl is, we know what a boarder girl is, we know what an international girl is. But once we started to look more closely and our conversations started to open up around what their experiences were, I very quickly recognised that the experience of our international students could be cut up in so many more ways. So within international students, you've got boarding and you've got homestay students. Now, their experiences are completely different, and the challenges that they face, whether they're in a homestay environment or a boarding environment, were incredibly different. And it led us to creating what they called, and we didn't give it a particular name, but we gave it an international student help space, a group space that would only be for international students. And it was populated and created by the students based on the information that they felt students in their situation don't currently receive. So we storyboarded all of this out. We just had sheets of paper everywhere, and we just basically storyboarded out what this group page would look like, what would be the big rocks that would be in it. So what are the key sort of sub-pages, and what are those key components within it, and that this space would be completely student-owned, so that students would have right access to the space, they could manipulate the pages, they could add their components where necessary, and also populate it as they needed to. So, using the news component to be able to have the international coordinator share with them about the international dinner that was coming up, or having them start to chat internally within our Schoolbox environment rather than via other platforms that the school wasn't able to control, because we very quickly learnt that some of those platforms were non-compliant with the way the school allowed students to communicate. So what it did was it showed them that they could have ownership of it, firstly. We learnt things we didn't know, and it added value in a way that is only now becoming apparent. So for the first time this year, those students now are using that part of the Schoolbox instance to be able to help onboard those students. And rather than the school onboarding students through the enrolment process, and I learned a lot about that, as I said, when my wife was head of enrolments, they just sort of funneled in a particular way. They're given some very high-level information, and then that's kind of it. Here's your Panama, you're a St Margaret's girl, knock yourself out. What enrolment started to do was think about how they could onboard them better, and just allowed students to do it. And so, albeit that I'm not at the school anymore, I'm still getting feedback from the teachers around how that has initially gone, and the feedback has been really positive thus far. Of course, I can't, and I'm not in a position to be able to show you what any of what that particular space looks like, because there's some complexities there. I've just come from the school, and so we sort of came to an arrangement that I would talk about it, because that was my life for the last 3 years, and so I do know a lot about it. But there's also a reality that I work for a vendor that the school leverages now. So I will be able to show you some of the other areas where students are active in the instance, and the ways that they're active. But what I wanted to do was just to show you that you can think as big as you want. So if your school's in a position where you completely trust your students, and let's be honest, if you give them full access and right access to a space and they do the wrong thing, at least it's in a controlled environment, right? It's one that you know about. It's not in a Facebook group, it's not somewhere else, it's inside your own school walls. So that's good. So where can it be applied? If you've got house pages, so if your school's got house pages, why not give your house leaders right access to the page and let them create the content? They know more about the house than you do, probably. I mean, it's one of the core parts of being in a school, being that pastoral part in terms of being what house you're in. The only control that we instituted when we first released house groups to the house captains, and I'll show this one in a minute, was that there were a couple of things that must be on the page. A brief outline around the house, so the history of it, the badge that the girls wear as sort of an identifier. When you go to the page, there's an image of the badge, so you know you're on Chaucer's page or Lawson or Kendall's page. And that there needs to be timely news in there, so you need to be updating that information regularly. And once given control, we just all walked away and it was fantastic, and now it just drives itself. We have, and the school had a very clear direction around not needing to copyright any of that information. So, some schools are very protective of, student-populated information, that needing to go through an editing process before it can be published. But if you think about it, it's not going to anyone outside of your environment. And if you are concerned that there are people that can see it, like parents, you don't allow parent access to the page. So just...
I know that when we publish a weekly, say for Digistorm or Welcome to Parents, something simple like that, it still goes through a moderator to check that it's got all the right font or whatever it is, but it gets checked. I'd just be really worried about if someone decided to, as a kid, say something really mean because they can, even though it's in-house and in school and not going anywhere else, that's still for the school population. Does it go through a moderator first, or just they get editing?
I guess the answer to that question is in how your school views the likelihood of that happening, and secondly, how you would respond to it. So for me, that's a bigger issue around trust around students. It's a much bigger issue, and it's not an operational issue. So in order to get to this stage, you have to be very, very confident and very clear in letting your students know that there is some risk in this for them, but that risk might only be this big because the potentiality of the value that it can add is that big. And that's where, and if you think back to the earlier slides in the deck around how much control we do and what that balance is, it may not be 50-50. It might be that the school is 95% controlling it and the students have 5% control. I would argue that there would be no value in doing it if that's the case. But it's a school-by-school decision, of course. And I think it's really powerful because as I come back to my earlier comments around, one of my biggest mentors, they're one of your biggest assets. And we do squander them. We don't use them. Because as the husband to a head of sport, it had always occurred to me that at the start of the year, as schools, we've always done it this way. We give a sports captain's badge or a house leader's badge, and then I used to view it very critically for the next 12 months, and at the end of the year, always ask myself, what do those students do other than get a badge and get their name in the honour roll? What do we make them do that they actually would love to do anyway, that they're probably already doing, but are leveraging channels that A, we're not happy with, B, aren't efficient, and C, aren't about a tool that the school puts them at the centre of. From the operational standpoint and the moderate, we can talk about that offline if you want as well. So this is an example of a girl that I taught who every week posts news and builds culture within her house in order to be able to communicate with the girls. One of the imperatives here was that within the timetabling structure, house no longer became something that was able to be fitted in. And that was quite sad, but we weren't getting a whole lot of value out of it as a school. Students would come together for 15 minutes at a time. The house leaders would go, what are we going to do? I don't know. They weren't prepared. And now when we've moved to this scenario, they can do it as they need it, when they need it, and in a more relevant way. And the students are far more engaged. The house pages are one of the most hit pages within the instance because it's where students live. Again, in a house page, previously, you know, in order to help build culture within the house and, you know, a very practical reason, a poll can be used. I've seen houses where they just ask the students within their house, you know, what lollies do you need us to bring you for swimming carnival to get you through the torture that is swimming carnival, apparently. And in this case, it was more around, what theme do you want? So they just asked. It was very easy. They got the feedback really quickly. Previously, I mean, we didn't even know how they were finding this out. But it was, they were telling us that it was onerous, and now they just do it. I said earlier that one of the must-haves on a house page was that the students had to leave the house badge. And after a week of allowing right access to the house captains, I came back and I found all sorts of changes. And that controlling teacher part of me went... And then I stopped for a moment and thought, no, this will be okay. But still, where is the Lawson house badge? That's how it was placed on the page, but if you look closely, the great man's got it as a little Pell pin now. Every other house group found another way to do it. Some had them as gold chains and multiple ones. Some had them as flowers in ears and all sorts of things. And I said to them, that's not what we talked about. And they said, no, you said it just has to be on the page. It's on the page. Awesome. Great. Tick. They gave him a blue jacket. It's still got the history of the house, who the man, like why it's named after Lawson, who the man was. Fine. Again, it may not seem like a big thing, but the value to the students was tremendous. The fact that we were able to surface a whole bunch of information and use in a way that we weren't previously was fantastic. But this is the one that that I want to share with you last, and it does relate to teaching and learning. So until this year, Queensland had a quite antiquated curriculum system, and I'm pleased to now be able to stand in front of people from interstate and say, yes, we're going to be doing external exams now. What a neat idea. But in preparation for the old QCS test, which Year 12s would sit, and in order to, galvanise that Year 12 group around preparation for that standardised test, the academic prefects that I didn't even know we had, they were just one of the thousands of girls that got a badge. I didn't know we had academic prefects. I just assumed that if you were a prefect, you would have a vested interest in your academics probably anyway. But we have specific academic prefects. And through the Dean of Teaching and Learning and the Dean of Studies, so 7 to 9 lead and 10, 11, 12 lead, they asked would it be possible within the instance to have an academic hub, as they called it. And we sat down with them and we said, because they said, you know, we've got these other spaces we can control, why can we not control this academic space? And we said, well, tell us what is it? What's it? What is the? Why do you need this space? What is this for? We're not saying no, but we need. I need to be overwhelmingly convinced that this will add value. And they said, well, at the moment we have all these resources and we email them here and we send them in this Facebook group here, but we can't get every student in the Facebook group because some of them aren't on Facebook on purpose because they don't want to be, and that's valid. So we know that every student is in the Year 12 group within the instance that is populated with SIS rules, UPS rules. Could we possibly have a restricted group that is just another group for Year 12s and it's just purely about academics? Sure. So within 2 weeks, they had built this environment with multiple subpages underneath all of it, links to existing pages within the instance, and those existing pages being, say, research, essay writing help, and academic integrity that exist within the library, the school library area within the instance that I had previously built. So had seen value in those spaces, but wanted to surface them and streamline it, so they didn't say, you know, go to the library, there's great resources in there. Actually, let's just surface those for you. But things like study tips, they took control of the need to start to focus on cognitive verbs, as students will need to under the new system. And so really took control of the academic agenda and what they needed out of it offline as they needed it. And the best part of it was that those two deans came to me and just said, we don't have to do any of this anymore. We don't have to populate, like they keep coming to us wanting these, can you tell me about a great study tip? I need, I need some referencing support. I need this and I need that. And the value in that was that the learned helplessness of those students always coming and asking went away because students took control of it, surfaced it for them and gave it to them. This space is now available for all students, 7 to 12, and is the core job of those academic prefects, is to keep this constantly updated. On this day, there was no news to post, but as it gets closer to the external exam, they were blogging in there. They had a countdown at the top of the page that some students asked to take it away because it was just too stressful to see the seconds elapsing. Please take it away. I've just wasted 25 seconds. I need to think about it. But the purpose of it was that it gave them control. We unlocked their agency. We leveraged an asset that we have in spades, and we added value for them. And they came up with the look and feel and all of those things. You know, it could be better, but it's functional and it works for them. So what I wanted to get for you out of this session was to get you thinking about, is it possible to do these things? Yes, it's very, very possible. Highly possible to give students control over spaces within Schoolbox. The question for you is, are you willing to? And if so, when? Because any of this stuff could be done by any one of you. And I'm certain that many of you already are, but there are no doubt countless opportunities within your schools that you don't know currently, that you will find out if only you ask. You know, go to your heads of year, go to your prefects, say, what is it we don't know about you that you'd like us to know? You know, is there something in Schoolbox that you would like to take control of? And they will soon tell you. So I'll open the floor up to questions, if you have any. In terms of showing students how to move components, add, and those types of things, that very operational, how do you use it? Not formally, but in the sense that it's a formal 1 hour and we sit down and we go, it takes 5 minutes. You now have, I've changed the permissions to the page, you now have right access to the page, so go in and delete something. Oh, but what will happen? You'll delete it, and that's fine. We're very okay with you doing that. Just be aware that if you do, it impacts on whatever whether it was the files component or whatever. You can easily populate it again. You can pull it back up again. Schoolbox, as you know, is a very intuitive piece of software to use. It's drop and drag. It's very easy for students to get the hang of. The key bit is, for that first week, is he serious? Are they really still going to let us do that? And they go a bit crazy initially, and that's great. But after a period of time, you can come back and say, let's just rein it in a bit. It's great to have all these wonderful photos, but how much time are you spending on that? Is it actually adding really any great value? All you need it to do, have a couple of photos. It needs to have timely information. It needs to be relatable to your fellow students, because you are one. Because as educators, we don't know what their experience is like. I think we know, but we don't know. because we're not living their daily lives. And so what we do as schools is our very best to give them the experience that we think they need. But once you scratch the surface, you find out that there are things that you may be already doing that don't add any value. So why continue to do them? And things that you aren't doing that could be tremendously valuable. So let's focus on those things because they'll give us the most bang for our buck. So there's no real formal training. It's just, yeah, go for it.
Are these all groups that staff are members of as well? If something, say, was
Yeah, so the head of house, for instance, would and all the teachers that are tied to that house would be members of that group as well, and just leveraging the UPS to have them in there. So, I mean, if trust is there, and it is in spades at this school, we're very comfortable that the students are using it in a functional way.
If you have a group that is, and you've got like an outside tutor that is not actually part of the school base, can they be part of the group?
Yeah, they could be. It depends on what role you've categorised them under within your instance. So, are you talking about, say, you might have an external tutor group or something like that, or?
It's more, yeah, pretty much. And so they're an external tutor, and I'm trying to put them on the group, but they've given me their email. I'm trying to add them.
Yeah.
I don't know how to add them.
Yeah, you could leverage the guest user role if the school's not currently already doing that, or you could create a separate role and give it a different name. I mean, at St Margaret's we trialled an extra role called coaches, but we found that didn't really work out for us. It was too specific, and it didn't hit other people that we needed. In that school, we had what we called supervised study session, where students, after ensemble practice or sport, were still not having mum and dad come and collect them until 6:30 because they're busy working parents. So they have a free study session that's in the library, supervised by university students as part of our residential college that was attached to the school. And those students come in, it's free, and so we give them guest access, and they have tutor groups within there. Yeah.
Can you show me how to set that up?
That's, so we can definitely, that's a very easy one, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Any other questions? Yep. So we did ask that question, and at the time there wasn't the necessity, and the school, the primary school, didn't see any great necessity at that stage. That's not to say that there wouldn't be any in the future. One thing that we initially did when we set up our instance was have separate house groups, secondary and junior, because they do, they have athletics carnivals on different days and that sort of stuff. But the school felt that was just too granular, and because it's a Peter 12 school, they wanted the house captains to be pastorally involved in girls that are 5 in pre-prep all the way through to their year level. So, but certainly it could be done. I mean, there's no reason why you couldn't be allowing students to do that in a primary house page, or yeah. There was just no need to. Yeah. Oh.
One of the things that one of my staff asked me to raise, and it's in here, is they really like the ability as a moderator to lock certain aspects of the page that let people on a group page with the right access change up and things. Is there something kind of more granular than just giving kids full access to everything, or no access at all? Is there any in-betweens to that?
So with if I'm hearing you correctly, you've created a page, it's maybe templated, and you've decided that they're the components you want, but students are moving the components around, or yeah. So we have addressed as a business not to that granular a level. You will have seen that in one of the more recent updates that you can lock the page for editing, but that's the entire page. I couldn't say at this point whether it will ever get to that granular level, but But the purpose of doing that was to address how it was people were inadvertently moving components on a touchscreen device, so on an iPad or a Android or iPhone, just as you're swiping. But I can certainly see the value in that. Yeah. But again, I mean, the way that we as a school addressed that was creating minimum use standards and guides that would allow, like it was a 3 or 4 page document that said, if you're creating a page like this, these are the minimum components that it need to have on it, and these are the reasons why. Of course, changes get made over time. The purpose of doing that was to make people who were creating the content cognizant of the needs of the end user, mainly parents, around some uniformity around if I'm in a basketball page, but then I go to volleyball, they should look and feel the same to a certain degree. And where I find information on that page, I should be able to find it similarly in the same place on that page. And most of my teachers that I worked with were really good at that. Yeah, and it also gave them, that template, and as a starting point, they didn't have to build from scratch. So they kind of like, oh, they've already given us some things, so let me just populate that straight away. Yeah. Did you still have a question? No. All good? Well, if there's no more, thank you for your attendance. I hope you get something out of that, and enjoy the rest of the conference. We're a little bit early, aren't we?
What better time to finish early than before lunch?
Exactly. So lunch is at 12:30, but feel free to get in there and get something to eat early. We are reconvening at 1:30 in your various sessions, so enjoy those, and I'll be getting around and seeing those. So thank you.
We should thank you.
Oh.
I just briefly wanted to say this presentation was one of those ones where, as a teacher, letting go is probably one of the hardest things. So it was actually nice to hear a success story and not lose my mind about it. Now, I told Pete he couldn't have a gift for it because he worked for us, but that seems a little bit wrong. So if you could just join me in thanking Pete for his wonderful presentation.